legality assurance. And when I talk about the economics of legality assurance, what am I talking about? Am I talking about the economics of rule compliance, the behavior about how to follow rules, or am I talking about the economics about rule making? And this is an important thing because rule compliance is a bit too complex, because most of illegal actions do not constitute an environmental harm. Also, some actors are defined legal by the law. Of course, in some countries, you're only allowed to cut legally if you own the land or you have a title to the land. If not, you are already defined by the law as an illegal actor. And of course, in some countries like Ecuador, you can have some legal actions that actually are in favor of the harm of the environment, like deforestation. You can deforest at least 30% of your land to go for agriculture. So this rule compliance is a bit too tricky. So what I would like to discuss with you is a little bit about the economics of legality assurance in the role of understanding stakeholder decision making and the effect of rule compliance. So the content of my presentation will be an analytical view of the problem of legal compliance. I will present you the case of Costa Rica to see if we can find some evidences, and of course some very 4 lessons learned and the ongoing process work. So the idea is to present you a little bit what has been going on more than what you're going to read in the book, because the book is more like a kind of a phase 1 or diagnostic studies about this type of purification systems. So one of the basic questions I have is how forests are allocated in society. So why do we need a forest law? What is the public interest behind a forest law? Those kind of questions are kind of big questions that we have to keep in mind. And we have to understand that why do we don't need a forest law for coffee producing or banana production, but we need a forest law for forest. It's because forests produce a bundle of goods and services, private goods and public services. So if we understand that the production forest or the private forest, because it produces private goods like timber, non-timber forest product, and tourism, could be one type of forest, even though it could be the same forest as the environmental forest that produce public services like the ecosystem functions. You already are aware about the carbon sequestration and storage, biodiversity and other functions. So the question here would be how those private and public goods and services from the forest are required for society, and what mechanisms are required by each type of good and service for the correct allocation. So this is a question that has a very old answer. Already Buchanan in 1968 wrote this statement at the beginning of his book. He says, people are observed to demand and supply certain goods and services through market institutions. They are also observed to demand and supply other goods and services through political institutions. The first are called private goods, and the second are called public goods. So we may end up thinking that the reason of a forest law is to protect the public goods that are coming from forests. So let's say the ecological integrity of the forest is what should be the main interest of a forest law. So if we put this kind of matrix, you have in a column production forest, and the other column the environmental forest. So we will, of course, understand the goods and services that we have in the first line is production forest will derive private goods, and the environmental forest will derive public goods. You have listed there. And the institutions that are required for their allocation is for private goods, you require markets, and for environmental forests, you require political institutions or more multilateral institutions. After the Cold War has ended, of course, we now know a little bit more about multilaterality at the international level. So the social dynamics of market institutions, you already know, are consumers and producers. And the social dynamics of environmental forests is the power dynamic of interest groups. And the allocation mechanisms of those institutions, instead, in the case of markets, is the price through transactions, and of the political institution is the majority rule or the voting. You can see that as in our democracies, as citizens we have to vote, or in other institutions there is a board of directors which also apply the majority rule, and those majority rules could be the simple majority of the 3/4. So we have, we may say that we have two different constitutional governance situations. Of course, we need very clear property rights for the governance of the markets, and we need a specific rule of law depending on the political and legal system that each country or each situation. Of course, the costs for managing those institutions are, in the market case, are transaction costs, and in the political institution are the agreement costs. So you know how much it costs an election. So the agreement costs of coming to an election are very, very high, which probably the transaction cost or the agreement cost in a constitution, in a Congress or at the board of directors are much less. So the utility capture in the market, of course, is the forest landowner, the industrials, woodworkers, consumers, and the political institution. Let's say the state is looking for the good as a whole society. So let's now think why I'm explaining you this kind of class. It's because we have some fiscal arrangements in forest resource allocation in private forest land in Costa Rica. So the idea of a new forest law was if we can make a very simplistic grouping of stakeholders. Let's call it environmental in green, industrial in red, and forest owners in blue. So maybe you can see in the column of value, if all the stakeholders value the same, the forest in a society, let's say 4 units, $4 billion each group, and if they share also the cost, let's say 3 units or $3 billion worth of a fiscal system, in this case cost will be measured in taxes. So like we can say that the environmental will have that value and will agree to pay a fuel tax to pay payment of environmental services to forest owners. And at least after they pay the tax, they will have a +1 forest net value. The industrials will agree to pay a forest tax. That is kind of a tax that you will pay to society for changing the environmental use of a tree and turn it into a private good. And probably the tax will be, let's say, of the amount of 3 units too. And they also will have a net value of 1 unit. And the forest owners will agree to implement sustainable forest management standards, which are a cost for them, in exchange for payment of environmental services and other incentives that they will receive. And they will, of course, receive another 1 unit of net benefit. So as a society, you can see in this graph that you have a 3 units net benefit for the whole country. This kind of arrangement, or fiscal arrangement, can only be possible if we have a majority rule of at least 3/4. So you have to oblige that at least 3/4 of the groups, they have to come into an agreement with this situation. So in this sense, you can say that all the stakeholders in a society will share the benefits and the cost of having delivered this type of policy. So, but the real situation in Costa Rica is that we have a simple majority rule when we make laws. So the idea here is what happened when the environmentalists and the industrial, they're kind of voting against the forest owners. So we have that the environmental groups eliminate the payment of environmental services and set over-regulation in SFM standards, and the industrial contested the payment of environmental services. That means that these two groups, they don't pay taxes. They have a high value for the forest because they want, each of them, they would like to have a free forest. And of course, the net value for them is going to be very high. But the forest owner, with this condition, they have a lower perception of the value of the forest. And of course, they have to assume all the cost for certification, for sustainable forest management. So they have to assume almost all the costs, so they have a perception of -7. So even though a society as a whole, you will have a positive perception of forest, the forest owners will have a negative perception. So then you can explain why forest owners will go into illegality or even more to do deforestation and to move into other type of activities. So this is kind of the analytical framework we have used to start looking at the problem in Costa Rica. So we come and we start seeing three different problems. Very inefficient intermediation, very high margins. So there is in the law, you're not allowed to export logs because they tell you we don't export logs because we want to give a lot of work to keep. So you have to throw your logs into the local market at very low prices. And they, of course, produce a lot of wood with a lot of waste and very high margins of earnings. There is a high bureaucracy, high cost for accessing legality, and a lot of over-regulations. What I mean by over-regulation, excessive rules when you do forest management, like heavy planning. They ban forest species that are scarce. The growing cycles become fixed and very long, and 40% of a very high percentage of the commercial volume has to stay as a remnant, as part of the remnant forest. And the protected areas become really big. About 30% of the area in a forest cannot be touched. So all these situations, here you can see how Costa Rica, the cost of accessing legality is about $14 per cubic meter. And to be able to have a forest permit, you have to wait between 6 and 18 months. You see kind of what could be the capital cost for that. And you have to go through 11 actors, 31 procedures, and 34 steps to be able to get such a permit. And let's see some numbers. Of course, you see that the land expectation value is like the net present value of sustainable forest management in an unregulated condition is about $2,600, and it's just above the land price. So sustainable forest management is possible. But if you remove the payment of environmental services, you reduce on about 37% the value of the forest. If you allow for heavy intermediation, then you reduce the value again by 17%. If you have a lot of legal costs, then you reduce the value by 13%. All these costs are gone through these stakeholder groups. And of course, you have all these over-regulations, ban of species, the cutting cycle, the harvesting intensity, the protection area, that will decrease in 33% in this blue number. This is the total of the over-regulation. So when you may calculate the value of the forest, after all this, the value of the forest is only minus $201. So we cannot oblige the people to do management when it is a nonsense financially. So that's why we have this kind of situation of timber removal. You see the yellow line there is the percentage of wood that is coming from natural forest, and after 1999, only 4% of the wood is coming from natural forest. In 1995, it was 40% of the timber came from natural forest. And after these new regulations, you can see how the yellow line is just in the base, and the magenta line, which is trees coming from pasture land. And usually pasture land that used to be forest, they increase very much. And it's kind of a wood laundry. So you kind of destroy the forest and then you take those trees as a permanent pasture land. And in 2001, they put some control, which doesn't mean that we will have more forest management, but we have a more clandestine activity, more truly illegal activity in the forest. So this is basically the basis of our analysis for the case studies you're going to read in the book. So, but I will not tell you a lot because the idea is you read the case study. But let's now talk a little bit about the public forest policy reform where REFOR has been active. So basically what we have done in the case studies is a problem definition. And then we have also worked in a phase 2 part of the project, which is how to reach for an agreement with the stakeholders and how to define a working agenda on topics that we could agree. Secondly, how we develop a policy instrument and how do we make a policy implementation in REFOR. So this is kind of the part. So the first point is the case study, another study that were used in a workshop with all stakeholders to really agree into the problem. And also there was, in this workshop, we also agreed on an agenda setting on points that we could agree on. Other points, we just dropped them out of the table, and we could agree on those three things. We need to revise the management standard for sustainable forest management, and we have done this process between 2006 and 2008, and this is what I'm going to explain you now. We also tried to build an institutional strengthening, building a platform for governance participation, and that was started from 2005 to 2009. And it's basically a formal platform composed of all academic institutions of Costa Rica for facilitating two things: the availability and transfer of technology for decision making, and facilitating process as an objective actor that could negotiate or facilitate between stakeholders. And also we did the reform of the forest regency system. As David had mentioned, this forestry regency system had a problem of independence. The forest regions were supposed to protect the forest for the state, but they were paid by the local industry. So there is a problem of economic dependency. So we needed to change that situation, and we have done it from 2007 to 2009. Actually, last month we finished the decree, and it's in the process of publication. So with this initial activity, we have the agenda. So we moved directly to the policy instrument formulation, that it took 1 year. So we defined the terms of reference with the stakeholders in July 2006. We brought and contracted a consultant to bring the state-of-the-art in sustainable forest management and construct a proposal in August 2006. And then he brought the proposal, and we brought again all the stakeholders into a workshop to agree on the proposal or to make. So after this workshop of September 2006, then we brought the proposals to expert panel of sustainable forest management to see if there is some technical viability on those proposals from October 2006 to January 2007, and we started some field validation of the proposal in May 2007, and after the validation, we edited the sustainable forest management decree. This was almost took a year. So the other activity was the policy instrument implementation. So we helped for the official presentation of the sustainable forest management standards to the State Forest Administration in September 2007. We started the publication process in Costa Rica, which is something very bureaucratic. We have to put a lot of money, move to one legal office to other. And also we started the preparation. As before, one of the objectives is training and capacity building, so we started preparation of a training strategy for this new management standard from February to March 2008. And we decided to go in a second field validation where we can get some numbers for this validation for designing and developing training materials. That was another 2 months. And by June 2008, we had a very good news. We had the decree publication, and we started the familiarization of the decree with a lot of the stakeholders organizations in July 2008. And we started with training activities with the state and private foresters. In September, we made one training activity, and then in December, we ended up with a training activity. Just on this is a copy of the decree, and that is the activity of presenting the decree to the authorities. This is a training, part of the training activity we did in the forest. You can notice how pineapple is really coming right next to the forest in Costa Rica, and they don't need a pineapple wall. So some basic lessons learned in this process. Of course, we are still in the process of finishing the forest regency, and we are very proud that in Costa Rica we have been able to implement three decrees. So the basic lessons learned we work with legitimate actors. That means actors that have urgency in solving the problem. They will be accountable, and they will have representation, so they can take decisions in the name of the group that they represent. And also those actors are, legitimate actors are those who share costs and benefits in this process. We also work on the topics where we can reach an agreement to improve, and of course sometimes we don't solve the problem completely, but we try through this policy process to reach an improvement, one step forward. So we cannot be very perfectionist in this case. So the other thing is we have to invest in knowledge, generation and gathering, also technology transfer and capacity building at all levels. So for CATIE and very it was very important to invest in this interface between science and policy. Also, with its governance thinking, the process is as important as the product, because we strengthen governance and institutions, and we aim to monitor and evaluate the system composed of all the actors, and not to monitor institutions. And we have to think that we are working at the decree level. So many environmental problems of forests cannot be fixed at this decree level, not even at the forest law level. We have to think more that they have to be fixed at the constitutional level, at the rights definition level. So especially when it comes to the limitations of private property rights in respect to public goods, the definition of what is a majority rule, and things about the compensation principles for the forest. So basically, this is what I would like to show.
Guillermo, thank you very much indeed. I think that's a fascinating reflection on one of the case studies in the book. And it's particularly interesting to see how you